Go ahead and take care of my introduction, then we'll get things underway. Okay. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Daniel O'Neill. I'm the chair of the HYLA CLE committee this bar year. We really appreciate you joining us here today. This is going to be a fantastic program. This program really speaks to two of our main primary interests that we've been trying to present CLEs on through our committee, taking care of practical skills and also really the importance of social justice and topics like this. Over the past couple of bar years, we've had a variety of presentations on getting involved with pro bono criminal defense, the low-income taxpayer clinics. So this is just an amazing extension of the kind of work that we do. And especially this bar year is an important bar year for HYLA, since our current president, Halbon led the kind of march on this to have this finally created, that HYLA now has an LGBTQ plus committee, which mirrors what HBA has. So that was really exciting that happened in this bar year. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Christopher Halbon, who is the inaugural chair of HYLA's LGBTQ plus committee. He is an associate at Kelley, Drye, Warren, and he's going to go ahead and introduce our fantastic speaker. And we want to thank you all for joining us here today. Christopher?
Awesome. Thanks, Daniel, and thank you everybody for joining us here today. As Daniel said, my name is Chris Halbon, and I am an attorney at Kelley, Drye, and Warren, serving as HYLA's inaugural LGBTQ plus committee chair. We hope to use this committee generally to better connect young attorneys with pro bono opportunities affecting the LGBTQ plus community. And today, specifically, we're going to be putting on a presentation to help connect young attorneys here with opportunities to help with pro bono name and gender marker changes. To that end, the HBA and HYLA LGBTQ plus committees are honored to be supported by the Stonewall Law Association of Greater Houston, aka SLAG, and joined by Gregory Jones, who will be our speaker today. SLAG is an association of LGBTQ plus legal professionals providing a voice for our community, as well as CLEs and volunteer opportunities. Be sure to check out their website at the end of today's session for more information about becoming a member too. Let me just speak a little bit about who Chase is, because he'll be doing majority of the speaking today. But Chase is a former teacher, a native Houstonian, unlike some of us, although we got here as soon as we could, and graduate of the South Texas College of Law downtown. He's licensed in Texas and Florida, and he practices family law and zealously advocates for our community here in Houston. With that, I'll let Chase begin today's presentation. He's got a number of different points he wants to make, and we'll follow today's session with a brief question and answer session. Hopefully, Chase will have some time to field some questions, but if not, we'll be able to provide contact information for anybody that you listen to today that you might want to learn more from. Little bit of housekeeping. Normally we would have a CLE number for y'all to take down during in the middle of the presentation. We don't have that number just yet. We'll send that out as soon as we do, and y'all can apply for CLE credit that way. So with all that being said, take it away, Chase.
All right, good morning. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. All right, so this is my first official Zoom CLE. So I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to speak to you. As you can imagine, this topic is way larger than an hour is going to give us time for. So it's going to seem relatively condensed and kind of quick. That doesn't mean that we're just going to cut it off and leave you hanging. There's so much more to this subject and so many more possibilities. So what I'm going to try to do is give you kind of the basics. And if you have questions, I believe there's a question and answer thing in the Zoom that you can use. And then, of course, if we don't get to all of those here today, feel free to send them on and we'll get you whatever answers you need. We appreciate, certainly in the LGBT community, anybody who wants to volunteer and put forth any kind of services that help, especially those that are more marginalized in our community. The transgender community is one of the parts of the LGBTQ plus community that tends to need our help the most. Something as simple as a name change takes up 2 pages in our code book, but changes lives significantly. and can be one of the most difficult things that some trans people have to do in their lives. So I'm just going to kind of start a little bit with an overview of Texas. I can only speak to Texas and Florida. Those are the laws that I know. In Texas, we are a little bit fortunate that we don't have jurisdictional restrictions to the county of residence. Thank you. Of course, not all judges know this, so be aware that you will get the occasional judge, especially in family courts or designated family courts, where the extent of their name change experience generally has to do with divorces. So sometimes they will tie that to the jurisdictional requirements for divorce. It's not part of the code for name change, but sometimes they'll insist on that. Florida, on the other hand, does have, unfortunately, residential requirements for jurisdiction. So if you happen to live in a very red county, a very conservative county, there's a lot of places, unfortunately, some people can't get their name and gender marker changed. But here in Texas, we are a bit fortunate that you can travel. And because you can travel, of course, our more liberal counties tend to be a lot better. Harris is a bit of an anomaly. So in Harris County, because we do this roulette thing in our courts, whenever you file a case, you can't really go down there and say, hey, would you give this to Judge so-and-so? The clerk just sort of puts it on the wheel and it ends up with whoever the next judge is in line. And so it can be kind of a crapshoot. So generally speaking, your more rural counties are going to be more problematic, more difficult maybe to get, maybe not the names changed more than the gender markers. Sometimes if your names are more gender neutral, you won't have as much trouble. And then it can just really kind of be a hit or miss in your rural counties. And then of course, our favorite counties are Travis and Bear. Sometimes you can get them done in Dallas. And then, like I said, Harris really is like sticking your petition in the middle of a roulette wheel and going and seeing who you get. Most volunteer organizations that do this kind of work will typically send their people to Travis County. It just makes it easier. Travis has a little bit different system in the way they do things. I know they prefer we don't just advertise that carte blanche across the world. They prefer not to do just name changes only. They like just the name and gender marker changes because they know those are more difficult. However, the one thing that I would recommend, and this is important just for jurisdictional reasons and you know, the basics of a lawsuit, when a trans person goes to get their name changed, if they run into any kind of trouble in any court, you have to be mindful of the fact that a final order from a court creates real havoc. So if you know someone, a trans person in a situation where you've helped them, you've assisted them in getting their orders, they go to the court, they file their petition, they file their order, and I'll give you some information about how we do that. And they get a negative result from a court. I can't stress enough that it is far better to non-suit and try somewhere else than it is to let that case go to finality, because of course, you know, any case that goes to finality requires an appeal, requires, you know, and most trans people can't afford that. It gets really messy and it's really a big headache. So that's why most of the organizations that I've worked with, we try to send them to places where we know they'll get a favorable outcome. All right, so that's just kind of a broad overview of the counties. I'm no expert in this. I've done this volunteer work for several years, but I can promise you there are a lot of other people in this state that do this probably better than I do. So the information I'm going to give you is my experience only. It's certainly not the only experience out there. So hopefully at some point you guys will come across some other folks that have done this. I choose, as a matter of my giving back to the community, I don't represent people unless they absolutely insist, and I don't charge to do the paperwork. So there is an organization in Houston that I've done a lot of work with, TLACH, which is the Trans Legal Aid Houston. That's run by a guy named Lou Weaver and his group. They do good work. They've worked very, very hard to help transgender people get name and gender marker changes done over the last many years. I believe they do clinics every other month. And I believe you can find them on Facebook and on the web. Okay, so generally speaking, name changes are ultimately probably one of the simplest legal things you can possibly do. You need a petition. It has some very specific requirements. You file an order with the petition. And best case scenario, when you turn all that in, you don't even need a hearing. The judge should just look at it, take it by submission, sign the order, and you should be done. That doesn't always happen in every court in every county. The good thing is that we've had some changes over the last 10, 12 years. So it used to be, you used to have to go get your fingerprint card done, and then you had to send it to DPS, and DPS had to run your fingerprints and send it to the court. And so you had to wait and call the court over and over again until they actually got the results of your background check. And then you could go to court and have a hearing and get your name changed, that kind of stuff. The courts don't require that anymore, at least most of them don't. And please understand, when I give you this information, it's general. So when I say courts don't require that, I'm not saying they all don't. There may be courts that do in some small counties somewhere. But generally speaking, most of them do not require that anymore. All they require is that you submit the fingerprint card with your petition, so that if the court wanted to check, they could. Most of the time, unless you have an FBI number or a state number, they probably don't check, or you give them some history, some reason to think that you have some criminal history or whatever. So generally, to get a name change, it's pretty simple. The code, the part of the code that covers the Texas Family Code for adults is 45.101 in the Texas Family Code. The petition's pretty simple. You just have to state your old name, the new name that you want, any driver's license you may have had over the last 10 years, and that number. Sometimes people know they had a driver's license back in Tennessee so many years ago, but they don't have the number. And when they came here to Texas, they had to surrender the license, and so they have no way of knowing the number. That's okay. Sometimes if you can't find it, you can just put that in the order. I don't know what the number was. As long as you identify that there was one. Social Security number, FBI number, there's a number, I forget what it's called, the SB number, which is very similar to the FBI number, but it's state-based. So if they've ever been convicted of a crime, they'll have one of these numbers. All of those items need to be in the petition. I can tell you, if you forget to put them in the petition, but you put them in the order, it gives the court an opportunity to deny your request. It is very unlikely, not impossible, but very unlikely, if someone has committed a felony that they've been convicted for, that they're probably not going to get a name change. I can't say I've never seen it happen, but it's really against public interest, and the state of Texas, they take that kind of serious. So it's extremely rare that you're going to find anyone. It's not completely prohibited by the code, but it's not something that most judges are going to grant. Misdemeanors, on the other hand, they will. It depends on how long ago the misdemeanor was, what the person's criminal history has been since that act was committed and they were convicted, that kind of stuff. The petition and the order should be filed together at the same time. Most courts, and this has been kind of interesting too, we've had this whole really big surge in by submission stuff, which has been great. If you work in family law, it's fantastic. There are so many things that I don't have to go for a hearing for now that I should have never had to go for a hearing for before, which is fabulous. And name changes really are one of those things that the judge doesn't really need to talk to the person. As long as everything in the documentation is in order, there shouldn't be a reason why the judge doesn't grant it, unless they're one of those people. So by submission has become kind of the norm now because of COVID. which is great because it's kind of opened up some doors in some counties that we didn't really have access to the submission before. I think there's probably some lawyers that would argue with me about the value of submission, but I can tell you as a family law attorney, submitting things by submission has made my life much easier. It's much more efficient for my clients, and we get things done a lot quicker. So in that regard, it's been very, very nice. But not every county will do that. Some counties will require a hearing. And so what I generally do is try to prepare my clients for the hearing. Like I said, most of the time I don't represent them in court. What I usually do, part of my volunteer work, is I get them prepared. So I prepare all their documentation for them. I tell them, go do a background check on yourself. Make sure you know what's going to come up on you. Get your fingerprint card, get everything in order. And then I'll draft the documentation for them. And then I'll give them instructions on how to go file their paperwork, and then kind of give them directions on what will happen. And I also kind of give them a list of things that you need to call me if these things happen. If the clerk won't do this, or if you can't do that, or if you get a call about this, or the judge, there's a list of things. And actually I can probably provide those to Chris after this, so that he can pass that around if you'd like. Those kinds of things, because if there are things that the client is going to run into trouble, and they're going to end up in one of those positions I spoke about in the very beginning, where they may run the risk of ending up in an appellate situation, we want to try to avoid that at all costs before they get there. Most people who end up coming for this kind of assistance don't really understand the legal system, so they don't really know what they need to be looking out for. That's part of what the assistance is that I provide when I do this volunteer work. If you have not done this before and you want to get into doing it, and you can find an organization, like I said, here in Houston, we have TLACH, which, like I said, does this every other month. They're a great organization to get started with. They do a great job. They've honed this whole process down to a T. It's a great way to get started. And if you can't, or you don't have time to volunteer, I think they usually do it on Thursday evenings and Saturday mornings. But if you don't have time for that, it's really not a difficult thing to get involved in, and you can reach out, and you know, I'm happy to help get you started. The documents are relatively easy. The only thing that I require with my documents are that you don't charge. So all I do for name changes and gender marker changes is volunteer work. So if I provide or share my documents, I just ask that they not be used to be made money with. I think that's fair. We all have things we do make money with, things we draft for the purpose of making money, but these were drafted specifically to help trans people for free, and so I kind of like to keep it that way. Let's see. The order. Once they get the order, the cool thing is here in Harris County, and I don't know some of the other counties, I practice mostly in Harris. In Harris County, you can order the certified copies online and they will email them to you, which is awesome because every trans person is going to need multiple certified copies. The good thing is if they email it to you, unlike the old days when you used to have to go to the courthouse and have them actually give you, 5, we used to tell people to get at least 5 copies when they put their little stamp on there. Now, if they email it to you, well, you can, share that by email. You don't need more than 1 copy. At $1 a page, that's great. It's like 2 or 3 pages long, depending on what size type you put it in. And so it's not very expensive, but the certified copies are critical because that opens up the next step once a trans person does get their name and gender marker changed. Once they get their gender marker and name changed, and this is one of the things where I've done some volunteer work with some organizations and they kind of leave this piece out, And I really think it's critical that if you're going to volunteer and help people, you got to kind of help them all the way to the end of the road. So once they get that order, they need to know what to do with it. So my recommendation, and the recommendation with a lot of the organizations I've worked with, have always been, first, go get a driver's license. When we used to send people in person to Austin or San Antonio, we used to find wherever the nearest DMV was, and we would tell them, as soon as you get that order in your hand, go straight to the DMV and get your driver's license updated. These days, because of COVID and because of the fact that a lot of this is being done by submission and online, they should be able to do that closer to their home if they don't have to, even if they filed and got their order out of another county. If they've done it all by submission online, then hopefully they won't have to actually drive to the county, and they'll be able to go take their order to the local DMV. However, I heard recently that the only way you can go in person to the DMV because of COVID is to make appointments. So I don't think they can just run down the road now and wave their paper all excited and say, please give me a new license. So there may be a little different process to that at this point. I recommend that they check with their local DMV office and see how they're requiring that kind of stuff. If they have a date, if they have a submission date, I try to remind them that even though we do by submission, and even though you have a submission date, it doesn't always mean that the judge signs and posts the order that day. So here in Harris County, even with other orders I get, it can take 1 to 3 days depending on whether the judge hand signs it or electronically signs it. Sometimes it doesn't actually show up in the docket for me to download until 2 or 3 days later. But every county is going to be different, and I don't know what counties you guys are practicing in, but I'm sure that you all probably know how your counties work. Travis County is pretty good about getting their stuff uploaded pretty quick. I know that. And Bear County's there, it depends. So once they get that order in their hand, driver's license first, social security number second. I think social security also is requiring appointments for any kind of in-person contact. And I think you have to go in person to change your social security number based on a court order and your name, to change your name and gender marker on your social security number. And then after that, it just depends. There's a whole slew of different things, and it depends on where the person is in their lives. Do they own a house? Do they need to update their deed? Do they have professional licenses? Do they have diplomas from universities? Most colleges are pretty good about sending or providing new diplomas. Many of them will charge, some of them won't. It really depends on the university. This is kind of the reason that they need so many different copies of these orders, because they have to go around and update their entire life. The other thing that a lot of them don't think about, and I try to kind of fill in the blanks for, are things like your credit report. Credit reports are absolutely affected by name changes, and it really depends on how old the person is. If the person's been around for a long time, I've known trans people who are in their 40s and 50s and 60s, and so they have a whole credit history that's in their old name. And then I know kids that are just getting started and they never get a credit history in their old name because they're 18, 19 years old and they didn't have credit to begin with. So what I try to do with everybody that I assist and volunteer with is just to try to fill in all of the things I can think of that might affect that person. I think I have a checklist somewhere. I try to remember all the questions I want to ask, like, do you have this? Do you have this? Do you have this? Et cetera, et cetera. But once they get that driver's license changed, then all of the things that need to align with that driver's license need to be changed too. Bank accounts, savings accounts, passport, that kind of stuff. One thing, speaking of passports, it's really important, and I can't stress this enough to all the trans people that I work with. Even if you're not ever going to travel out of the country, spend the money, get a passport. And the reason for that is because a federal ID is much greater and much stronger than a state ID. So whereas a state ID can sometimes be rejected, a federal ID will never be rejected. And whereas a state ID requires a secondary form of identification. So usually, and you may have noticed this even for yourself, when you go places and they ask you for ID, you'll see it'll have a list. It'll say, okay, if you're going to provide a state ID, I'm going to need a secondary form of identification, a social security card, credit card, something else that will match. Or they'll have a list of primary identification, and on that primary list of identification is a passport. And passports are very, very handy and really great things for trans folks to have. The passport process is really easy. Making sure that it has your correct gender and name on it is very easy to do. The passport office has streamlined this process over the last many years. Unfortunately, during the 4 years previous to the president we have now, they did cause some problems, but that's been fixed and we're back to where we were before. So the process is very streamlined. Even with COVID, it does take a little longer, but everything takes a little longer. But it is well worth the money. I think it's $110 plus you have to get your picture. And it does take a little longer to get for them to mail you back everything and your passport. But a passport is good for 10 years. So I think it's really well worth having, and I always recommend it to all the trans folks that I help when they get their name and gender marker changed. And then other than that, it's really just a matter of being supportive. The biggest part of this for a trans person isn't legal. You're talking about somebody who's literally about to completely change their lives, and it's a big deal. I've sat next to many, many people who have explained to me that when you ask people to call you by some other name and you've been called some name your whole life, and you know, there's a process, an emotional process, a mental process that goes through with that, and it's kind of two-sided. So I try to be respectful. I try to make sure that I don't forget that in the middle of this legal process that, you know, when I put my brain to the law, I do law. I try not to forget that these people really are making a huge change in their life. What takes up 2 pages in my code book and 2 pages on a petition and 3 pages on an order is really a completely life-altering situation for some people who couldn't live without this. It's that important. And unfortunately, there is a huge need in the trans community because this stuff is expensive. I think the fees went up this year. I haven't looked at the fee schedule. I know it used to be like $270, and I think it went up to 3 something now. I try to give all of the people that I volunteer to assist the inability to pay form. I explain to them about how to fill it out and how they can qualify for it. I believe that Lone Star Legal Aid does assist sometimes as well here in Houston. I wish I could speak more to the rest of the counties. I don't spend a lot of time in the other counties, but I'm sure there are other assistance organizations in the other counties, and probably checking with some of those bar associations, they probably have some recommendations. But for me, the big deal is this is a group of people who very often have been shunned by their families, and they've been kicked out of places, and they don't have a lot, and they're just trying to figure out who they are. And if I can contribute to making their lives a little easier, if I can take this one thing, this one huge thing in their lives that makes this huge difference and make it not so difficult, it's really rewarding. It's very, very rewarding. So, and I way oversimplified this, and I'm sorry, and I feel like I'm trying to rush through this, but we don't have a lot of time today, and I want to give you guys an opportunity if you have some questions. These are just the basics. There's certainly more to it. I didn't even touch on doing minors. Minors are a lot different. They require consent from parents, and if your parents are divorced, it gets complicated. That could be a whole other CLE about how to do minors. But generally for adults, this is kind of like your basic roadmap, I guess, on how to get started. And don't be afraid to go out there and assist if you know someone that needs some help. And then there's some folks. I mean, I'll leave my information. If you got questions, you're always welcome to ask. I'm always here to help. And like I said, this is a community that I really took under my wing, because I went to law school specifically because I wanted to help people. And when you see people who are treated as badly, specifically as badly as trans people can be treated, anytime I can contribute something to make it better for them, I certainly will. Okay, so I see a question, and I'm going to see if I can click on this without messing it up. Oh, there we go. Absolutely. So the question is, can law students get involved with this too with the organizations? Absolutely. You don't have to be a practicing attorney to help with the paperwork. You can absolutely get involved. I know that here in Houston, that TLACH always loves law students to come volunteer. And as a matter of fact, they would like you to come as a law student and stay as a lawyer. There are plenty of things that you can do that don't require a law license in order for you to be able to contribute and support folks in the community. Let's see. It's a little difficult, but not impossible. Okay, so Chris said, it might be difficult for non-American citizens to get name changes. As long as they fit the requirements under the code and they can produce birth certificate and driver's license, and they haven't committed a crime, or if they have, it's a misdemeanor and they can show that they've rehabilitated, as long as they fit all of the requirements in their petition and can satisfy what the court's looking for, there shouldn't be any reason why they can't. They do have to be a citizen of Texas. Of course, they would have to be a resident of Texas. I want to clarify that, because I said earlier that we don't have a residency requirement. We do not have a county residency requirement, but of course, Texas, you have to be a citizen of Texas in order to be under the authority of the courts. So you do have to live somewhere in Texas, but you're not restricted to the county in which you reside. So I know that we've done several non-citizens, green card holders and the like. Now, undocumented people, probably not. But those people that are here on their green cards, or even those that are naturalized citizens, they would be able to change their name and gender marker. All right, any other questions that I didn't ask or answer? Sorry. I opened this box on my screen. I don't know how to make it go away. Like I said, I'm sorry. It seems like I rushed through this. It's just really kind of a very, very large topic, and we could really go deeper into some of this. But I kind of wanted to give you the broad overview so that you would get an idea of how to get started. And then, like I said, I'm just one person who does some of this kind of on my own and with local organizations. But I'm sure we can reach out if you guys want to give me kind of an idea of the counties that you're in. I can get Christopher a list of maybe some organizations in those counties, and he can distribute those to you if you'd like.
That sounds great, Chase. And maybe I know you mentioned earlier you had some, maybe one-sheeters or some packets of information that maybe we could pass around to folks who are on this call today. Obviously, we will honor the promise that we made earlier, and we won't use this for making money or anything like that. But I think it's important to share some of the success stories that you may have encountered, and share that with the rest of the group.
Right. And there are people, like if somebody asks me to go to court with them, I charge for my time, and I tell them that. Okay. But the paperwork itself, the documents, I don't charge for those. And I try to encourage them to go and do it on their own, because it's really not that big a deal. And unless they're in a county where they're going to have an in-person hearing, where they really feel they need somebody standing next to them and they want to pay for that, I try to encourage them to go and do it by submission. Turn your papers in. You don't need to pay all kinds of money for a lawyer to do that. You know, most of the time they're very successful by submission, and there's just no reason for them to even stand before a judge.
Chase, I may have missed this a little bit earlier, but are there fees associated with the paperwork, or, you know, is it feasible for somebody of modest income to be able to handle this themselves?
Yeah, so there's there are a couple of resources. So there are filing fees. And like I said, I know it used to be $270, and then I think January 1st we had this huge increase in fees that came from the state. So I'd have to go look up what it is now. It's over $300, but I don't remember exactly what it is now. There is a form. It's called the inability to pay the court fees form that I always provide to everybody I assist. And it's based on income. You fill it out and they turn that in with their petition if they can't afford the court filing fees. I would say 90+% of the time, if somebody turns in one of those forms, it's granted. So usually, everybody I've ever assisted in doing this, who's turned in one of those forms, it's been granted. I've not had one turned down. But it's based on their income. So there's some questions on the form that they ask. They have to fill out. As far as getting the actual documents themselves, the petition and the order, I don't charge anything for those forms. And that's what I was talking about earlier. I'm happy to share the ones that I use, but those I cannot have anybody charge for because they were specifically designed for this volunteer work. And then the other cost would be the fingerprints, which I think are $10 at the easiest place for them to go is a place called IdentGo. It's electronic fingerprints they do, and then they print them on a card for you. And I think they actually even keep them in a file if you need them for something else later on. You can actually just call them and say, I need another copy. But I think they're like $10, and that's pretty much the extent of the expenses associated with it.
Great.
There it is. Brittany posted it. The statement of inability. That's the fancy name for the I can't pay form.
Thank you, Brittany, for sending that to the group. I don't know if everyone can see that. It says to everyone, but you know, that's a good, it's probably good for, you know, many different cases if you handle cases, not just for, you know, gender marker or name changes, but thank you again.
It is a general form for any time. You know, we have open courts access by constitutional right here in Texas. So the form is designed to make sure that everybody has access to the courts regardless of their income.
Awesome.
Oh, I put my email in there. If you have any questions, just feel free to email me. I'm happy to answer whatever questions you may have. I know when we're in the thick of listening and trying to process, sometimes we don't think of something. And then if you're like me, as soon as you drop out of a Zoom, it's like, bam, I have 50 questions.
Well, Chase, we definitely want to thank you for your time today and for all this information. I know Brittany already said, you know, this is very helpful information. You know, we have a number of different people on this call today. It looks like we had, you know, more than 10 people show up. And so I think a lot of people will find this to be very, very helpful. And Chase, once again, we thank you, and to everybody else on the call today. You know, we hope to provide opportunities like this, you know, as the year goes on. You know, HYLA staked out Tuesdays on the schedule for, you know, foreseeable future. So we will have plenty of CLEs outside of this subject matter, but, you know, be on the lookout for more CLE type opportunities, you know, as they regard LGBTQ plus issues.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. I really appreciate it. This was fun. And like I said, I wish we had more time. We have so much more we could talk about, but I look forward to your future content.
Great. Yeah, this just got our feet wet this time. And to everyone else on the call, like I mentioned earlier, we don't have that CLE number available for y'all yet, but we'll have that eventually, and we'll send that out to everybody on the call today. All right. Well, with that being said, Chase, once again, thank you for your time. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Slag, for all the support y'all have given to put this on for everybody. And, we hope to have some more opportunities coming your way.
Thank you so much for letting us participate, Christopher.
No problem. Thank you.
Gotta go.
Bye, y'all.